Tonight's presentation will be on SAS, the revolution of SAS, and we have the privilege and pleasure to hear from Manish Chowdhury, founder of GoEcart. So I'll introduce him very briefly and then I'll turn it over to Manish. Manish provides business and technology leadership to GoEcart and its clients, and he has guided the company to become one of the most admired e-commerce platform providers in the world. He is a recognized expert in his field and a sought-after speaker on topics ranging from e-commerce and online marketing to business leadership and entrepreneurship. He holds a BS in computer engineering from the University of Bridgeport, and he also holds multiple business process patents on collaborative commerce. And just a few weeks ago, he was invited by University of Bridgeport to do their commencement ceremony. So please welcome Manish Chowdhury.
Just by way of quick introduction, GoEcart is a SaaS e-commerce platform provider, meaning we help retailers sell goods online. And also, by way of definition, there's always a lot of confusion that I find.
Take this away and fix it.
Oh, okay. Sure. Can everybody hear me at the back?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so by way of definition, I think there's a lot of confusion. I don't want to just put it out there that what is SaaS? You know, SaaS, the SaaS vendor owns the software. You don't own it, and it runs on SaaS vendor's data center, not on your data center. The customer usually will rent it for a monthly fee or an annual fee, as they call the subscription fee. And typically, all the customers that use the software are using the same version of the software. That's kind of the classical definition of SaaS. And what differentiates SaaS from what they call the application service providers, which was anyone who could deliver the software in the cloud. I think most times a lot of people misconstrue anything being delivered on the cloud as a SaaS. And it's on demand, meaning you buy as much as you need, and you don't over-provision, and you pay for what you use.
So that's kind of the classical definition of SaaS, which is different than the traditional software. So I want to talk about SaaS as it comes to e-commerce. That's sort of our area of expertise in terms of software application. So going back in the 80s, there was only store. So on the left-hand side, you see a single channel. The customer would go buy something, go to the store, and get it. Then came the late 80s or early 90s. Suddenly there were catalogs, the mail order catalogs that you get in the mail. So most companies, what they would do is they would create a separate division and say, that's my catalog business. And they'll have their own 800 number, the post office, the mailing address, and they'll be almost treated as two separate entities within the organization. But customer had more than one channel that they could buy from. So they became multi-channel. And then suddenly somebody figured out that you could buy online and pick it up in store. So in the early 2000s or even mid 2000s, late 2000s, the idea of leveraging your brick and mortar stores along with the digital footprints created what they call omni-channel. But behind the scenes, the software systems, the applications that were supporting this business were all standalone. They just somehow mashed them together, got somehow to connect inventory information back to the website, but behind the scenes, they were all operating as a mishmash web of applications and systems that relied on batch processes, nightly runs, that kind of stuff to make these systems digitized, to give the customer an impression that it's all working using one common application and one common data. But we all know the problems that arise from that is, you place an order, then you walk up, perhaps even within 10 minutes if you walk up to Target and go to the internet pickup station, they will say, oh, we don't see your order yet. Because the lag, it's running every half an hour, what have you. And so what came after that is what we call unified commerce from our perspective. It is thinking from a customer's perspective and building all the pieces of the software that are interconnected in real time, and you get 360-degree view of the customer and the business. So it's no longer brute force integration, and that's where the unified commerce platform, the evolution of SaaS. So while SaaS was being delivered throughout, but the SaaS has changed dramatically, at least for us. And what customers are looking for is something that's comprehensive, that's agile, and that's customizable, because every business wants to operate differently, whether you sell them packaged software or you sell them SaaS. Just one more slide about the evolution of SaaS in e-commerce space. And what's really interesting is the data on the right-hand side that's actually coming from Forrester Research, very recent data. And the red bars, if you can read careful from far, is basically showing the distribution of SaaS revenue in technology for e-commerce platform compared to the licensed. So the light gray bar at the top is the licensed revenue, and the red bar at the bottom is the SaaS subscription. And SaaS subscription is expected to double between now and 2019, whereas you'll see that the license revenue, the gray bar, which is mostly the product like IBM WebSphere in my space, IBM or Oracle would go out and sell, even though they're making strides now to the cloud side. That will peak in 2017 and start actually going down when the industry itself is growing at 16-17% per year. So that's kind of the tipping point, if you will. The pinnacle of licensed software, at least in my space in e-commerce, is 2017. And after that, there's going to be a gradual decline and continuous growth of the SaaS vendors. And on the left-hand side, what we see is what are some of the factors that are driving this movement towards SaaS. It's not just the clever buzzword that everybody is looking for and everybody loves SaaS, but there are some real business benefits why customers are gravitating towards SaaS. One, they want agility and innovation. They don't want a software that stays stagnant forever, meaning the responsibility of innovation should no longer be with the customer, because once they've customized your packaged software, they cannot get free upgrades and they lock themselves in, and the world is moving so fast. I mean, even in retail, very soon you're going to be seeing things like virtual reality, augmented reality, and while the software may have a 3-5 year term, most retailers cannot afford to wait 3-5 years before they bring these innovations to the customer. Otherwise, they'll be dead. So what they want is the ability to scale quickly. That's the other tenet of SaaS, is most retailers actually get about 70 to 80% of the annual revenue in the time frame from the week of Thanksgiving going up to December 24. That can constitute anywhere between 60 to 90% of all revenue. That's 4 to 6 week period. So if you weren't using SaaS, then you would have the responsibility of scaling your software, your data center, your infrastructure, your security, all of those things. And that's one big advantage with SaaS. A true SaaS provider will provision resources on demand so you can scale without compromising performance or security. A global customer reach. You want to try something small in Latin America, and we deal with customers all the time. You deal with enterprise customers that bought a very expensive license of a large enterprise application, but this new market is too small to marshal all of those resources to go after, just to dip your toe in the water. And therefore, global expansion, geographical expansion is very well suited where you don't have to deploy security and infrastructure and footprint, but that's another big advantage. And then omni-channel, this is happening not just in retail, but channels are converging just about everywhere. And then you have to have one application talk to another application when they are residing inside a firewall. The responsibility of making those open and available now falls with your IT department, and which are overloaded as they are. So marketers want to get quick win, quick access, and we cannot put the marketers behind IT, which can be a challenge. And as I stated earlier, that just because you're delivering software on the internet does not make you a SaaS company by any stretch of the imagination. So the key metrics, the three things that keep me up at night as a founder, as an CEO of a SaaS company, and those three things are CMRR, which stands for Contracted Monthly Recurring Revenue. So it's, in simple words, it's recurring revenue. Number two is churn, is how many customers are deactivating their account and how many are no longer using. And that can be different to different products, because if you have a freemium model, that churn would be slightly different. Obviously, I'm talking here about live customers, live paying customers that are churning. And if you have any questions, since we have time, please feel free to interject. And cash flow, because the rule with SaaS business is you might be signing up a lot of deals, a lot of accounts, but it can actually lead to cash flow problem, which can actually bring a company down even when the company is growing like gangbusters. That's very counterintuitive to most traditional packaged software business, where when you sell a license, you get a big chunk of money up front, whereas when I sell a large SaaS deal, I'm only getting a monthly revenue and maybe some services, but I have the obligation of delivering those services, so I got to ramp up, which means I might see a cash flow squeeze, even though I'm growing, and my bookings are much longer.
Manish, when you went to the SaaS model, because you made a conversion at some point in time from a package license, a software licensing company to a SaaS model, how did your investors take that change on your income statement, right? Because it was a pretty significant change in what they used to see versus what they were seeing now from a cash flow and income point of view.
That's a great question. So we made the transition from a services company to SaaS, but this is a very important question because we also did a project with Resnick, and Gorgana was part of it. That's how I got to meet her when they did a project for us to recast our financial accounting principles into SaaS compliant, or GAAP compliant principles. And one of the biggest lessons we learned was people often confuse bookings versus revenue earned. And I think probably that's where you're headed with that, is just because somebody paid you 12 months of fees in advance doesn't necessarily mean that can be reflected on your income statement, because you can only recognize there's a whole host of issues around revenue recognition, which I think Paul and you can talk a lot more in a more educated manner. But I think that was a big opener for us, because your revenue can be highly misleading if you're just looking at QuickBooks, especially when you're going to go raise capital.
Yeah, and Paul, when you looked at that, how do you couch that for investors?
Well,
That's a great question. So before I answer that, let me introduce myself. I'm with our advisory practice within Cloudflare, where my colleague is with on the accounting side. But I worked with a lot of SaaS organizations, and I got into the business in 2001 with a small company in San Francisco on Market Street that had 30 employees. The name of the company was Salesforce.com. And they became one of the founders of SaaS. And if you look at some other companies related, like the Amazons of the world and these SaaS-based business models, there's different metrics and KPIs associated, typically around customer engagement and customer growth, in addition to churn and cash flow and CMMR as well too. So what I saw and experienced was this concept called net future earnings potential. So whereas Wall Street investors demand almost like a quarterly return, it's a little bit more of a pragmatic type of approach that benefits companies like Manish's company to build a real business, add customizations and features, and be in it for the long haul. So those are a couple of my thoughts.
Right, so in short, you gave Manish some ideas about how to couch this to investors and make them not focus all the time on CMRR, churn, and cash flow. There was more to it than that, is that?
Yeah, so concepts like customer lifetime value, customer retention, average order value, share of wallet. So Manish probably has at least a half a dozen to a dozen modules or key components of functionality. Next year, he'll probably have 50% more functionality as he rolls out waves of innovation and functionality, which then the customer actually pays a little bit more for potentially as well. So it's kind of balancing the features and the innovation gets paid for over time, and you want to retain that customer and keep that customer base. But from a SaaS perspective, the companies benefit more from increased subscription fees typically.
All right, so Manish, Paul stole your second. Paul, all right.
The other points I think Paul touched on a little bit, which is CAC, which is Customer Acquisition Cost, CAC. And if you ever go on Shark Tank, that's the first question they're going to ask. So that's, it's harder to calculate than one might imagine, and I think if you want to be more sophisticated, you probably want to calculate your CAC by different advertising channels or any form of customer acquisition. So you know that some channels may be more efficient than others. However, that doesn't mean you should not use other channels. So for example, branding. It's really hard to calculate your cost of customer acquisition through money that you're going to spend on branding, but kind of spills over into other areas. And customer lifetime value, which is one of the basically one of the metrics that demonstrate the what kind of long-term value creation are you putting out. So is your product, customers use it? Is it like something that maybe it's a wedding planning service? They'll only use it for X number of months. Once that event is over, you're done. So, or there's a product like GoEcart that once you get into the enterprise, it's almost very, very difficult to uproot that because all members of our client's organization are using it, from customer service people all the way to the inventory planners, and it takes a lot of training. So you want your CLTV to be very high, and you want your customer acquisition cost to be very low. And if you basically divide your monthly revenue by churn, you'll technically get the customer lifetime value. So if you have low churn and you have a high subscription fee, you'll have a pretty large customer lifetime value. And then one of the other rules of SaaS is tune before you scale. We as entrepreneurs are always highly optimistic. You get this one lead from Lithuania, and then you drop everything because you want to go close this guy who wants the software in Russian or whatever that thing is, because it's what makes us entrepreneurs, because we are highly optimistic. But then all of a sudden, maybe even more, it could be a very large brand. I mean, we get inquiries from large brands like DHL Africa, but we have to stay disciplined and say no, because we don't have customer service people in that time zone. We don't have local language speaking reps, and it looks more opportunistic. So, we want to just focus on where our market is. The number 4 rule is around sales, which is separate your hunters and farmers and pay them all on CMRR growth. So at GoEcart, at our company, we have a clear distinction between hunters and farmers. Hunters are salespeople that bring in new accounts, new logos, and farmers are people that are cultivating that account, that are account managers, and we make a huge distinction, because the personality trait even of the people that are relationship-based are not the ones that are just going to be as effective in hunting new deals. They just have very different personalities. And we want to pay them on CMRR growth. So the way how our comp plan is designed for salespeople is, there's 2 portions of it. One is they have a CMRR quota. So let's just say $10,000 of CMRR quota per quarter, and they may have $50,000 of services. So services percentage on the commission will be flat. Even if you sold $200,000 of services, you blew past your quota, we will not over-reward you. We will not. However, if you went and sold $20,000 of CMRR, you will not get commissioned at 150% as opposed to 100%, because we're trying to reward the behavior that we want the business to see. And we're all about CMRR. So the simple thing to do would be, if you combine everything, all the revenue, and play them up a flat percentage, that can be highly destructive in some ways, because now you don't have annuity, but you got this big project that you need to scale up for, and you paid a ton of money to your salesperson to sell something that you really did not intend or want to sell. So this is moving further down. Traditional IT channels don't work as well for SaaS. Savvy online marketing. So anyone if you're a SaaS product company, online marketing has got to be a core competency. It's not something that you can outsource, not in my opinion. That is just as important as your product, and it's important that you are very clever at the latest online marketing, because all your customers live on the internet. It's very important. We talked about staying local. The temptation to move and follow the lead can be difficult to resist, but I would highly recommend that. And then having one version of the code in production. This is something that you will encounter as soon as you have your customer number 2. The customer number 2 wants the software to be customized, because their business is different than the customer number 1. And that is, learning to say no to customization is perhaps one of the core competencies you'll need to develop if you don't have already. And the way to do it is through lots of configurations, and we'll talk about that shortly. And the important part of SaaS is the service, because this, at least in my space, is a very competitive market. There's a lot of competitors. So, service, not just, there's a concept, I call it customer focused versus customer driven. And there's a big distinction between the two. Customer focused means you are thinking about the better for the customer, thinking about their success, as opposed to customer driven, which is if the customer tells you do this, you will do that without asking twice. And we believe if the customer is successful on your platform, they're more likely to stay with you than they're failing and they love you. So I think that's very important. And then we talked about some and capital that's needed. It's getting harder for products in established markets that you have to do R&D and you have to sell. Obviously, all those costs are front-loaded, which can take up to 4 years of runway before you see any cash flow positive. So that's a metric to be aware of. And I'll just breeze through this because I think we spent quite a bit of time. If you're thinking about going into SaaS, what are some of the things you should think about? Make sure you choose a large market because there's a lot of competition, and the real benefit of SaaS, the pricing will come down. So unless you have, SaaS is all about volume, generally speaking. You can't really do a very large SaaS business, whether you look at Salesforce.com or you look at HubSpot. It's about volume, bring that total cost of ownership down and recover your fixed costs. So large market always helps. Create a hub on the web. What that means is that your online presence is super duper important. You know, you can build the best website for somebody else, but if your website doesn't look just as slick, you're probably not going to be able to convince them. And number two, just make sure all those links keep coming back to you as a source of reference back to you. So accelerating organic growth. This is all through SEO, clever marketing tactics. That's one of the big things you can do with a SaaS product. Because according to Google B2B research, 69% of the sales cycle takes place before a customer ever speaks to a rep. That's 70% of your sales cycle is happening without a human being ever talking to the customer. So what's talking with the customer is your case studies, your presentation, your website copy, your forms, your nurture campaigns, all of those. And create a compelling story. Go to a number of sites, number of products, I don't even know what they do. And that's really hard. If the customer cannot get it within the first 5 minutes of, or I should say first 5 seconds of landing on your website. So employ something very clever, simple, like a lot of people are doing this 45 to 90 second quick videos that give you very quickly the problem that you're trying to solve if the customer can relate to that. So creating a compelling story, building the business into the product. What that means is if your product is low priced, you want to put all the self-service tools as part of the product. So they shouldn't have to call a rep to add this module if that module is $10 a month. Because if you're going to get a rep involved, you're probably only delaying your profitability because it's going to cost you significantly more. So all of those hooks built into the product. Enable mass customization. What that means is enable mass configuration. Because customer number two's presence is going to be different than number one, but if you allow them to configure the product, assuming that all the other parts of the product work well with that configuration. So somebody wants to display 10 products on the page, they can change that number to 10. Somebody else wants to display 20. In our software, they can change it to 20. They don't have to call anyone. That's the example, a very simple example of configuration. API. The world is becoming more and more open. No matter what software you're going to develop, there'll be need for more software, competing, complementary products that if you're not supporting a highly scalable, open standards API, honestly, you can't build a software today in 2016 without it. In fact, API should be built before the product even ships. And engage your community. This is, some people will argue people can copy your product because, you can copy someone's product. You can look at it, you can easily get intel. They can copy your strategy, they can copy your marketing tactics. What's really hard to copy sometimes is the community. And the community that is part of the product, the best practices that share, the relationships, and building a strong community can be one of your moats that you build around your castle. Hard to do, but important. the components of SaaS, CMRR components. So you can increase your CMRR by adding new accounts. That's pretty simple. You can increase your CMRR by increasing your price, because there's a lot of wisdom around, how do you, if you start in the SMB, can you scale up and increase your pricing as your product get feature rich, and do you have pricing power? And on the converse, if you're competing in a very competitive space like ours, there's a lot of pricing pressure that will try to drive some pricing down as well. And the churn rate. So if you're losing more customers than you're gaining, so your churn rate is high, or you're losing them too fast, that will also affect your CMRR. And then cross-sell and upsell. So, it depends on how much other desirable features, functionalities you have in your product that compels you to move from, the first rung to the next. And that can have a significant impact if you have something like a land and expand strategy. And those are things that you need to think really hard, because if you just mistime or miscalculate either one, you can hurt yourself. Because if you price your product too high, then your new accounts will suffer. If you give them everything they could possibly buy, then there's not much room for cross-sell and upsell. And if the pricing, if the customer feels the pricing is questionable, then that will also have impact on referenceability and customer success metrics that you would need at the time of renewal to convince this customer to stay on.
And Paul, why don't we ask you to comment on what you've heard, and let me introduce, first of all, Paul Goldman. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Perfect, yeah.
Managing director at CohnReznick's Advisory Services. And Paul, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what CohnReznick Advisory does for these kinds of companies, and then talk about what you've heard and some feedback. I know you guys have been together for a while.
Sure. We help middle market, high growth companies with new digital business models, reimagining the customer experience around mobility and new digital technologies, operationalizing or doing process digitization to reduce cost or take cost out of the business. And we do a lot with big data analytics, visualization of data to drive primarily revenue growth, customer acquisition, and customer recapture for our clients. And first of all, Manish, excellent presentation, and it's an outstanding product in SaaS. A couple of quick thoughts, and I'm typically the guy who's selecting and implementing for clients. And one thing about SaaS that my clients really get the value out is the concept of configuration versus customization. It is so fast, and the things that we can do now within 30 days, 5 to 10 years ago would take 3 to 6 months.
And how many $1 million, Paul?
It's incredible.
Oh, just the consulting fees, right?
And that's kind of where our point of view is that customers and clients, the market, okay, there's no such thing as a 5-year strategy. Strategies are 5 months now related to this great revolution called, digital or 4.0 related to that. And companies have to reassess what, markets and customers are doing in 5-year types of periods. And they have to tweak or adjust their software and their platforms, whether it's marketing management, mobility, content management, e-commerce, CRM, in 30, 60, and 90-day increments. Similar to the way Facebook or a big player provides a new release of their software almost every week, as you would. So customization, the code base, it's more like a tenant model where the data model, the basic and the standards stay in play. But what's good about a company like Manisha's, is that it's highly configurable. So I could still be personalized in how I engage with my customer, but be in the same, it's a highway that has guardrails, traffic lights, and a double line for when you can pass and when you cannot pass. But you can decide what car you want to drive on it, how fast you want to drive it, and where you want to drive it to on that side. So that's the biggest thing with SaaS. A couple things related to e-commerce platforms in general is it used to be, and Manish had a great picture of omnichannel, where e-commerce was website, a shopping cart, and a catalog. And it was all about conversion, right? Quick, place the order, and hopefully nothing goes wrong, nothing crashes, the order goes out, and there's no returns. What we're seeing in the marketplace now is that e-commerce is becoming more not only transactions and conversions, but companies are using it to extend their brand and build a brand relationship or a product relationship with their companies. So the platforms incorporate powerful analytics, powerful components such as video or new ways of leveraging content in the sales process, or new ways of lead capture, or capturing the lead and doing something like a video chat or a sell. We were working with a client this morning where it's a retail client. As they're on a website, they would be able to text their friend on a mobile device and bring in a personal shopper from that particular company and do a three-way conversation as to, picking bridesmaids gowns for a particular retailer with 6 different people across the country in one session related to that. And that's not crazy. Customers, especially the millennial buyer, they're demanding that. They demand a unique customer experience. They demand multi-platform, not only online, but it's all mobile. They expect e-commerce companies to personalize their offering. They expect e-commerce and retail consumer product plays to capture their data and provide relevant offers in a safe and secure environment. It's high stakes. So with SaaS, it gives you the opportunity and the ability to change and keep continuously innovating, not just your applications, but your business processes, as well as your business model in general as well too. I think that's some of the larger value drivers of SaaS.
See a lot of transitions, right, from this, data package and services type arrangement that we had in the past to the SaaS environment. And the clients are all concerned about a lot of different things. So let's run through some of those. And Manish, we're going to challenge you a little bit, right, as we go through. Let's start with data, right, and data security. Is that top of mind for your clients? And how do you give them comfort? Because, it used to be they had the data in their own data center. Now they have data in your data center, and they don't have visibility of that data center.
Right, so we service retailers, merchants that accept credit cards. So data security is probably one of the top concerns our clients have. I'm sure you've all heard of the breaches at Target and Home Depot and everyone else. But also because we are the prime targets. If anyone wants to hack someone, they'd rather hack our system to get millions, tens of millions of credit cards than to, get some other quantitative data. So data security is absolutely top of mind. And actually, I would argue that that is one of the top reasons why a lot of our clients go to SaaS. Especially the SMBs. The SMBs don't have the expertise in-house. They don't have the resources in-house to manage security. Nowhere to the degree that we can manage. So we have to get third-party audit, like PCI. We have assessors that will actually test our systems and do a full audit to give us a certificate of pass or fail. And it happens on a monthly basis, quarterly basis. And that always keeps us on our toes because the PCI Council will release new standards and the auditors would pick up on those. So we have to constantly add those patches, otherwise you will not pass the audit. And if you don't pass the audit, that could even mean a breach of your agreement with your customer. So we feel that security is better handled. And there was one of the points that I was going to make later, which was around the concept of BYOD, which is bring your own device, which raises a whole host of other problems that creates a. So I would say even for the large enterprise, when they buy software from a vendor, they are not fully well versed in all the security attributes of the product. Yes, it may be in-house, but the internet, by definition, your customers are going to access your product from the internet, so it will be accessible. So we get that more from our larger enterprise customers. Once they go through our process, they are very satisfied. But it's a huge risk for the SaaS vendor to take security absolutely paramount, because every time you push out code, you have a potential for disrupting that security, and it only needs, somebody just needs a tiny window. I mean, just last week we were getting attacks from, Eastern Europe, but we were able to work with our hosting partners to disrupt that. There's a really cool tool that we've started using. It's a partnership we developed with a company called Cloudflare. I'm not going to plug them, but I think it's a very cost-effective tool that allows you to do things like distributed denial of service attacks. It's very cost-effective, and it also speeds up the website through caching.
Paul, Manish has given us some great pointers on things that we should think about. When you look back at your experience with SaaS companies, either as they made the transition from a traditional services company to a SaaS company, or as they started up a brand new SaaS company, what's the biggest mistake you see being made and most common mistake, and how do we avoid it?
It's the percentage of marketing and sales dollars. So I've seen companies go north of 60% of their revenues go right back into marketing and sales, and it's not enough allocation back to the R&D pipeline. And it's the chicken and egg type of theory, but it's managing, the best companies manage it like an investment portfolio, and you have to could constantly shift and manage that and balance that particular act. And I've seen some companies really have a great product, but they've gotten too aggressive with their sales and marketing budget and actually never recovered after the first big hit and spike within their product portfolio.
And Suzanne, let me target the same kind of question to you, but from a product marketing point of view. What's sort of the biggest mistake you see with SaaS companies as they try to market and engage their customers?
Well, a favorite quote of mine is, no one was ever mystified into buying anything. I think our
I've seen some
approach.
great websites that epitomize that, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And another favorite one from an old ad guy in the 50s is, don't tell me about your grass seed, tell me about my lawn. But that's just a personal favorite of mine. I think we are more and more, as you mentioned, Manish, it's a very crowded market, no matter what SaaS you are, unless it's something that's just being invented this very minute. And it's really difficult to break through the noise. And I think the biggest mistake is not being very clear and loud and proud about what exactly makes you different. Especially, for example, in BI, everybody has charts and graphs, everybody has dashboards. The poor consumer, I feel compassion for the customer out there looking at all these websites, trying to figure out what makes one different from the rest. So we are now taking the approach of drilling a hole 1 inch wide and 10 miles deep with our marketing. We don't veer, we don't confuse. I think that's the biggest mistake, is not being clear about who you are and conveying them.
And Manish, if I could ask you, you've heard some of the things that are mistakes. We're not, none of us are perfect. You said we didn't live in Nirvana, right? Single instance, great idea. Let's see you do it. But as you did that conversion, did you, are there mistakes that you look back on and say, boy, we did that wrong, and if I were advising somebody who's starting up today, I tell you, don't do X.
Yeah, quite a few actually. Depends how much.
All right, we have another hour.
Just looking back, I think something that Paul alluded to, everybody has the beginner's luck, right? You put a product into the market, you will get some customers, but not knowing whether they are your ideal customers or they were just customers, and then customers, the minute you have 2 paying customers, if you're not so lucky, they'll be taking you in 2 divergent directions. And when you have, say, 50 or 100, now you're spinning in all directions. So I think there's that, and as a bootstrap company, we were too focused on trying to please the customer, and we built many things that we should not have built. I think the temptation to satisfy everyone for the SaaS product can lead to almost like a Swiss Army knife that doesn't do one thing really well, does many things mediocre. And I think just taking the survey, continuously re-examining your product portfolio, your customers, and where the market is headed, and building the feature set that the market is going to appreciate, as opposed to perhaps doing catch-up or me too. It's never always the product that has the most number of features. That's a collective set of features of all your competitors will ever win. I think it's about finding that niche and going double down on the few areas, and then find the customers that want your product, as opposed to selling them a product that exists. In fact, there's a new school of marketing concept is, when we have the traditional marketing is about, you have a wide funnel, and then people will go down the funnel, and there comes out your marketing ready, your sales ready leads. There's a new concept they call it the flip the funnel. And so basically, I'll just find my ideal customers, and let's find other customers that are like my ideal customers, as opposed to casting a very wide net. So the other mistakes, I think, perhaps not investing enough in sales and marketing, or we did a lot of trade shows, a lot of branding campaigns that didn't quite work for us, where we should have perhaps done more guerrilla marketing. We should have done more other forms of marketing. So having a proper channel mix, and you're measuring your return based on each channel, as opposed to just trying to compete with the bigger competitors on their turf, is going to be very, very hard. You probably need something more growth hacking skills, like a little bit, we should have done more partnerships and ecosystem and strategic alliances. When you're small, you have limited sales and marketing capacity, and if you can engage the channel early and get traction, now you have a full hundreds of people, probably thousands of the channel selling for you. So SaaS, even today, cannot exist by itself. You have to plug yourself into the ecosystem where you're easy to find, you're easy to work with, and so we have had to adopt a very co-opetition-like strategy, where we would actually partner and compete with some of our partners at the same time. So because we have a suite product that does what they do, but it does many other things. So we've integrated with them and said, hey, if you're not ready to make the full switch, we'll provide the second half of the solution. If you're ready, we can take over the whole thing. So it's sort of, you're forced to play in an ecosystem with other providers.